समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. This is Bidisha and you're watching Economics. Last month, in my column, I did a fiscal analysis of 3 states that had just gone to elections: Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Kerala. I looked at 15 years of data, debt to GSDP trajectories, capital expenditure patterns, interest payment burdens, and the structural composition of each state's economy. My conclusion on Kerala was that of the 3 new governments, the UDF would inherit the most structurally challenging fiscal legacy. A state whose welfare commitments had comprehensively outrun its capacity to generate revenue, a services-dominated economy where manufacturing had barely crossed 10 to 12%, and where growth had been running on remittances and public expenditure rather than industrial output. That was the structural diagnosis. What I did not have back then were the treasury numbers. The figures that tell you not just what the balance sheet looks like, but how the state is actually functioning day to day to keep the lights on. The UDF government has now released its fiscal white paper. Those numbers are in, and one of them is the most striking figure I have encountered in years of tracking state finances. It is not the one making headlines. The number that dominated every headline when this white paper dropped was rupees 5.07 lakh crore, Kerala's total outstanding liabilities. Now that is a large number. I understand why it led every story. But if you are an economist reading this document, this is not where your eye goes. Outstanding liabilities are a stock figure. They tell you how much has accumulated. They do not tell you how the state is functioning right now, today, to meet its obligations. The number that tells you that is this one. In 2025, Kerala borrowed emergency cash from the Reserve Bank of India under what is called ways and means advances for 262 days. On top of that, it was an outright overdraft for 84 days. So 262 plus 84 is 346. There are 365 days in a year. For 346 of them, Kerala could not meet its own payments without going back to the RBI. At interest rates between 7.25 and 10.25% per annum, on top of the interest already built into its market borrowings, by any reasonable definition, the state was cash insolvent for the majority of last year. That is the number, not 5.07 lakh crore, 346 days. Now, to understand why 346 days is so alarming, I need to walk you through a concept that every student of public finance knows: the Domar condition. Named after the economist F.C. Domar, it is a simple but ruthless idea. A government's debt is sustainable only if the economy is growing faster than the effective interest rate on its borrowings. Now, when that condition holds, growth generates enough revenue to comfortably service what the state owes. But when the interest rate on borrowing exceeds the growth rate, the debt compounds faster than the capacity to repay it. You are not climbing out of the hole is just getting deeper and deeper. Kerala is not just failing the Domar condition, it is failing it in the most damaging way possible. Because it is not even borrowing to build things, it is borrowing to pay salaries, to pay pensions, and to increasingly pay the interest on the debt it already has. The borrowed money is not going into a road, into a factory or port, something that will generate future tax revenue and create the growth that could eventually make the debt self-liquidating. It is in fact going out the door the moment it arrives. The white paper uses a phrase I want you to hold in your mind. The debt is self-consuming. Now that is not a metaphor. That is a mechanical description of what is exactly happening. Here is the clearest way I can put this for you. For every 100 rupees in revenue that Kerala receives, 77.6 rupees is already committed before a single discretionary decision is even made. Salaries, pensions, interest payments gone before the government has decided to build one school, staff one hospital, or even lay 1 kilometer of road. The national average for this pre-committed expenditure across all Indian states is 46 rupees. That is a 30 percentage point gap. And what makes it truly structural, not cyclical, not political, not fixable by a good monsoon or a finance commission award, is that this gap has persisted for the entire past decade. It has not narrowed even once. Across governments, across economic conditions, it has simply sat there. Now, within that 77.6%, let me tell you which line item is actually the most worrying, and it may surprise you. It's not salaries. Salaries have actually come down slightly as a share of revenue receipts from 34.5% in 2015-16 to 30.1% in 2025-26. That is a meaningful, if modest, improvement. The alarming line is interest payments. They have gone from 16.1% to 20.9% over the same period. The national average for interest payments has stayed stable between 11 and 12% throughout. Kerala's gap with the national average on interest payments alone has more than doubled from 4.3 percentage points in 2015-16 to 8.5 percentage points in 2025-26. The white paper itself puts it this way, and I want to quote it directly because I think it is the most important sentence in that document. Every year of large open market borrowing adds permanently to the interest obligation in subsequent years. Today's borrowing becomes tomorrow's committed expenditure. Tomorrow's committed expenditure becomes the next year's treasury stress. The consequence is a government with almost no room to govern. The 23 rupees left in every 100 rupees after committed expenditure must cover the entire range of public services in Kerala. That is the UDF government's own white paper describing the functioning of a debt trap. Look at this chart on your screen. What you're seeing is Kerala's treasury stress plotted year by year. One portion shows the days the state was under ways and means advances from the RBI, the other shows outright overdraft days stacked on the top. From 2011 to 2013, there was almost nothing. The treasury needed no RBI support whatsoever. By 2019, WMA days reached 67. By 2025, 262 days under WMA with 84 more in outright overdraft. But notice the middle of this chart. Between 2020 and 2023, there is a visible dip. Things appeared to stabilize. If you were reading the headlines in those years, you might have concluded that Kerala was getting its house in order. That dip is the most deceptive feature of Kerala's entire fiscal story, and I will explain it to you how. Between 2020 and 2023, the centre transferred 48,388 crore to Kerala as revenue deficit grants, and another 28,813 crore as GST compensation. Together, 77,201 crore. A massive infusion of central money into Kerala's treasury. And it created the appearance of improvement. The WMA numbers looked better, the stress appeared to ease. Except, here is the detail that punctures that narrative entirely. Even in 2020, with 77,201 crore flowing in from the centre, Kerala was still under WMA for 234 days. The transfers were not fixing the underlying problem. They were concealing it. The structural mismatch between Kerala's committed expenditure and its own revenue generating capacity was always there. The central money was simply sitting on top of it like a cushion. And then the cushion was removed. The 16th Finance Commission discontinued all post-devolution revenue deficit grants. The 37,814 crore Kerala received under the 15th Finance Commission over 5 years, that entire category of support no longer exists. The 262 days under WMA in 2025 is what Kerala looks like without the cushion. This is not really a new crisis. It is the same structural crisis, fully unmasked, now visible in its true dimensions. This chart on your screen gives you the structural picture in 2 lines. One for Kerala, one for the average of all major Indian states. Both track committed expenditure, salaries, pensions, and interest combined as a share of revenue receipts across the past decade. The gap between those 2 lines is actually the story. It does not close, it does not narrow, it is there at the start of the decade and it is there at the end. And look at Kerala's line at the right end. It is tilting upward. That is the interest component compounding. Salaries are stabilizing, interest is not. Interest compounds whether or not anyone in Thiruvananthapuram makes a single decision. I want to give the previous LDF government its due. They saw the capital expenditure problem. They knew the budget could not support infrastructure investment when committed expenditure was consuming 77 paise of every rupee. So they kept up KIIFB, the Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board, as a mechanism to fund infrastructure outside the conventional budget. Now, theoretically, it was a sound idea. If you cannot invest through the budget, build a parallel channel. The white paper tells us what actually happened. KIIFB has accumulated 56,000 crore in total obligations, 21,000 crore in unmet loan liabilities, and 35,000 crore in pipeline project commitments. The productivity returns on those investments remain verified. The Domar problem was not solved off budget. It was replicated off budget. The LDF will contest this framing, and they are politically entitled to do so. But the 262-day figure comes from the RBI. The interest payment trajectory comes from the RBI's own state finances publication. The arithmetic is not a political opinion. Here is the hardest part of what the document establishes. The solution to Kerala's fiscal problem has always been the same thing: industrial deepening. Build a manufacturing base large enough to generate the tax buoyancy and private investment multipliers that make welfare commitments fiscally sustainable. And the window to do this cost effectively was wide open. From 2015 to 2023, when revenue deficit grants and GST compensation were flowing in, that was the moment to deploy borrowed money for its only legitimate long-term purpose: building a productive base whose own tax returns would eventually make the borrowing self-liquidating. Kerala did not do that. Compare it with Tamil Nadu, a state with comparable welfare commitments to its own population. Tamil Nadu's secondary sector contributes over 30% of gross value added. Manufacturing consistently exceeds 20%. That generates the tax buoyancy and private investment multipliers that keep debt serviceable even as welfare spending grows. Kerala's manufacturing share has barely crossed 13% even in its best recent year. The central transfers came in, they went out, the underlying productive structure did not really change. The white paper is documenting not really just a fiscal crisis. It is documenting the fiscal outcome of a 30-year industrial policy failure. And unlike interest payments, that is not a liability you can really refinance. Chief Minister V.D. Satishan presents his first budget on the 19th of June. Every number in that document will be read against the backdrop of what this white paper has now formally established. The question before this government is not whether Kerala is in fiscal crisis. That has been confirmed by the RBI one overdraft day at a time. The white paper has formalized it. The question is whether the government, with the courage to write this diagnosis, has the political resolve to act on it. Because acting on it means governing against 4 decades of political economic momentum. Kerala's constituencies were built on the implicit promise that the state would always deliver. The mathematics of that promise, as this white paper makes clear with technical precision, is no longer sustainable. The data told us this was coming. The RBI confirmed it. Now the white paper has put it in writing. The only question left is what exactly happens on the 19th of June. Thank you for watching.